Too many lights. He cruised slowly through town, looping back on himself several times. Finally, heading north through subdivisions, past an area of elegant estates, past a golf course, and up to where the road ran along the edge of a steep, wooded ravine. He stopped the car and pulled the girl off the floor. She lolled against him, and he cursed her dead weight as he half-carried, half-dragged her through the trees until he stood in a small clearing on the edge of the ravine. The fog had disappeared, and a three-quarter moon illuminated the rocks and scrubby trees, and, far below, the tumbling stream that wound its way along the bottom. He hesitated, thinking longingly of the gun in his pocket. But it had to look like an accident. This was the only way. He lifted the girl to her feet. He held her in his arms for a second until he got his balance. Then, with all his weight, he thrust her over the edge into the abyss. She didn't even know what happened. The moon went behind the clouds and the fog rolled back as he strained to hear the sound of her fall. With a pleased, sighing breath, he turned and felt his way through the trees to the car, then drove slowly through the dense fog back to his suite in one of the city's finest hotels. 1. Homicide Detective Franco Mahoney of the San Francisco Police Department watched impassively as the men from the Fire Department Rescue Services clambered down Mitchell's ravine toward the girl's body. Not that you could see much of her. Just her foot in a red sandal and her arm sticking up through the underbrush that had stopped her fall but failed to save her life. Now she would just be another statistic on the unsolved homicide list. He had seen it all before, but now he had a job to do. He had to find her killer. He glanced at his watch. It was 8 a.m. His shift was just finishing, and he thought longingly of the other luckier guys heading wearily home or for breakfast at the diner on Brannan, talking over the night's mayhem or maybe just talking dirty, letting off steam. It had been a long night, the usual drug killing in an alley, a stabbing in a squalid tenement room with more blood from the tiny Chinese victim than he had ever seen in a butcher's shop, and a body of a man tossed out onto the highway and run over several times before he was discovered and found to have been shot. The call about the girl in Mitchell's ravine had come at 7:34. It was his turn. His bad luck at the tail end of the shift. Some nights he wondered if he had done the right thing, becoming a cop. He sighed as he surveyed the clearing at the edge of the ravine. It was crowded with guys from the fire and public health departments, as well as the paramedics, the medical examiner, the lab technicians, and the TV news crews, plus all their equipment. Cables, winches, ladders, stretchers, oxygen tanks, drips, and cameras. The damp, grassy clearing was now a sea of mud. There had been just enough time to look around and assess that there was no sign of a struggle before the rescue services arrived, and by now any vital clues had disappeared, churned into the mud. Several uniformed cops, their eyes fixed on the ground, were sifting through the undergrowth, but Mahoney knew in his gut they were not going to find anything. There would be no torn-off buttons today. No threads caught on a branch, no spent bullet casings, no perfect clue. As a murder crime scene, it was a dead loss. He grinned, excusing himself the pun. Agatha Christie would have had just one perfect footprint, he thought longingly. Me? I'm left with just a body. And once the rescue services had arrived, that body had taken precedence. Everything must wait until it had been retrieved, even if it meant trampling on the evidence. The woman in the ravine still had her rights as a person, though probably for the last time. Then she would become just another toe-tagged Jane Doe in the chilly steel drawer in the city morgue until the public medical examiner finally got around to carving her up in search of physical evidence, or until some distraught parent or grieving, though maybe not, relative recalled that Auntie Flo or Sister Jolene or Cousin Peggy Sue hadn't been seen around in a while and came inquiring. Mahoney turned reluctantly to face the TV news cameras and told them briefly what he knew, that the body of a woman had been discovered early that morning by a man out walking his dogs. No, the man was not a suspect, and no, he had no other suspect as of that minute. Thank you and goodbye. Franco Mahoney had been a cop for 14 years, 7 of them as a detective on the homicide squad. He was said to be one of the best, a meticulous sifter of information and a finisher. He was known as a cop who never let go of a case. Years might pass, but Mahoney never forgot an unsolved murder.